like you're making a declaration, right? So if we go back in the song, that's why I said this kind of sounds like a fanfare, almost like trumpets, right? Dum, da, dum, da, dum, da, dum. And then once you get to the statement, we believe. It's like you're really standing firm in that. Be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. So let's try the chorus one more time, and then we're going to sing from the beginning all the way to this and moving forward. 1, 2. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be the holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. Very good. Back to the beginning so we get that practice. Precious cornerstone. 1, 2. Precious cornerstone, sure foundation. You are faithful to the end. We are waiting on you, Jesus. We believe you're all to us. Only Son of God, sent from heaven, hope and mercy at the cross. You are everything, you're the promise. Jesus, you are all to us. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be your holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. When this passing world is over, we will see you face to face. We're going to pause right there. So, when in song, usually you make a pattern and then you break it. And here, we're going to go higher. So we had 2 verses, chorus, 3rd verse. Just listen. When this passing world is over, we will see you face to face, and forever we will worship Jesus. You are all to us. It goes up again, making that victorious declaration before we go right back into the chorus. So we're going to try the 3rd verse all together so we don't separate it too much from the other verses. When this passing, just giving it to you in your ear. When this passing world is over, we will see you face to face, and forever we will worship Jesus. You are all to us. Good, let's keep going. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be your holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. Very good. For the sake of time, I'm going to cut us off right there. But you guys did great. All right? So maybe as you look at songs, look at those long shorts, because they're very interesting. At least if you're a nerd like me.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Wednesday Night Huddle. I hope that you are all doing well. Anytime that there is a war, there are three possible sides: allies, enemies, and neutral. And any government, any leader, should spend a significant amount of time evaluating which side to be a part of, whether to be friend, whether to be foe, or whether to attempt to try and be neutral. I'm curious, what are some of the variables, some of the thoughts to consider, some of the thoughts that individuals, leaders should consider before they take that horrible step of moving towards war? Whenever a conflict breaks out, what are some of the things that should be considered when deciding which group, whether to be ally, whether to be foe, or whether to be neutral? What do you think?
What their resources are.
Okay, what resources exist? What else? How many you're going up against. The size of your opponent would be something to consider. What else? Any alliances that you might be hoping to gain, or any alliances that are currently in force? Anything else? What reason are you engaging in this conflict, or not engaging in this conflict, as the case might be? Anything else? Hopefully there'll be some evaluation as to whether it warrants the loss of life that will inevitably occur. But no matter, within that decision, there is the weighing of costs and benefits, of risks and rewards, if you will, of whether it is most advantageous to engage, to not engage, to be friend, to be foe. What are the risks and what are the rewards? Tonight in our text of 2 Samuel chapter 17, we encounter several individuals who, despite the risk, decided to support David in the hopes that he would reclaim the throne. We've been in Samuel for quite some time now, the theme of which is God raises the king. And we've seen how God first raised up a king in Saul, a king who was right in the eyes of the people, but who tended to do what was only right in either his own eyes or the eyes of the people, and did not do what was right in the eyes of God. And as a result, God rejected him as king and raised up David, a king who was a king after his own heart, who would do what was right in the eyes of God, a man after his own heart. But we've seen that despite that David was a man after God's own heart, despite that he was a king after God's own heart, he was still human and was not perfect. And ultimately, he ends up failing in multiple places, but most notably his sin with Bathsheba. And because of that sin and his murder of Uriah, God cursed David and said that the sword would never depart from his house. And over the last several chapters, we've seen that unfold, which seems to begin at the rape of Tamar at the hands of Amnon. And David's failure to provide justice in that situation is the catalyst that motivates Absalom. We've seen Absalom, as he killed Amnon, decided to take justice in his own hands. And now we see Absalom trying to usurp David's throne, leading a revolt in order to take over the throne of David. Last chapter, we saw how David departed Jerusalem, how he fled Jerusalem. Chapter 15. In chapter 16, David has been fleeing Jerusalem, trying to save the people in Jerusalem and trying to perform a tactical retreat so as to have an opportunity to re-engage. And tonight, David is continuing in that flight. And we see several individuals helping him throughout that process. If I can get somebody to read chapter 17, that says 11. That means I meant to say 1 through 14, not 11 through 4. Chapter 17, verses 1 through 14, please.
Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace." And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all of the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say." And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, "Thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak." Then Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good." Hushai said, "You know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the people. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place, and as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, 'There has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' Then even the valiant men, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all the men with him, not one will be left." Is that 15? Oh. If he withdraws into the city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom."
All right, thank you. So what happens in this text? A little bit of treason. Certainly, revolts tend to be treasonous. What else? Okay, trying to figure out the best plan to capture David. How does Ahithophel phrase his counsel? What do you notice about it? He used the word "I" an awful lot. It's all about him. Why do you think Ahithophel is proposing that he lead the forces in battle? For notice he says, "Let me take a group, and I will go, and I will defeat, and I will bring back, and I will." Why do you think Ahithophel wanted to lead the forces?
His followers would have I'm talking about David, his followers would have no cause to be involved in the fighting in the battle.
Okay, perhaps it's an attempt to prevent David's men from engaging, for Absalom wouldn't be there. Any other reason? Could be a power play. Perhaps Ahithophel wants to be in power. Could very well be that Ahithophel wants to keep Israel together as much as possible. For notice he says that I will bring everybody back. That perhaps he's a little concerned that in Absalom's youth and his exuberance, that he might be overzealous and kill too many people. Or perhaps Ahithophel really wanted to make sure that David was killed. That I will focus all of my energy on David. For if you remember, at the end of the last chapter, Ahithophel gave Absalom the counsel to go and sleep with all of his father's concubines, thus creating an unreconcilable rift between father and son. And now Ahithophel wants to make certain to finish his plan of not only separating Absalom and David, but now eliminating David, and wants to make certain that it takes place. What counsel does Ahithophel give Absalom? Besides, let me take the forces, what is the rest of the counsel, specifically with regards to timing? Let me go tonight. And what was his reasoning for going tonight? A little bit of shock, taking advantage of the uncertainty, a little bit of shock and awe kind of thing. What do you think of his counsel? Is his counsel good or is it poor? Those of you who read ahead already know what the answer is. What was Hushai's rebuttal? To answer this question, let's look at Hushai's rebuttal. What was the essence of his rebuttal? Or counter counsel? That David was a fierce fighter and that he had had a lot of experience in war. Right now, David is fleeing for his life out in the wilderness, being chased by a man claiming to be king. Does that sound like anything we've heard before? It's all the time that he spent running away from Saul. That not only does David have great experience in war, he has great experience in this exact form of battle, where the king or someone claiming to be king is after him and he's running around in the wilderness. David has a wealth of experience to pull from. What happens if you give a magnificently wise general who has a lot of experience in war time to prepare? Things generally go very poorly. Because Ahithophel is correct. That at the moment, David has been kind of knocked back on his heels a little bit. That everything's reeling. He's been betrayed. He doesn't exactly know who's friend and who's foe. He's out running around. And yes, he has a lot of experience in war. However, if you give him time to prepare, that is significantly more problematic. That Ahithophel was right. That that the time to crush David was right then and right there, making sure to go after him, not giving him a chance to prepare, not giving him a chance to recover, but attacking him now while his spirits were low, while perhaps hope seemed to be fleeting, before he had a chance to regroup. But Absalom calls in Hushai and asks what his counsel was. What was the purpose behind Hushai's counsel? To give David time. Because Hushai didn't say, yeah, we're not going to attack him. Instead, he says, absolutely, let's attack him. But let's take a moment and gather everything. For the only thing Hushai could really give David was time. Time to prepare, time to regroup, time to get to a place of safety. Why did Absalom and the elders of Israel, notice that David has not only been betrayed by the people, but also by the elders of Israel at this point, the other leaders of Israel. Why did they accept Hushai's counsel? Ultimately, it's because it was because of God's providence, that it was what God wanted to do. And God worked through Hushai in such a way that Hushai presented this possible alternative. It was more diplomatic for who would be at the front leading the charge against David, according to Hushai's counsel. It wasn't Ahithophel. According to Hushai, who would be at the front of the forces going against David? Absalom. That it would be Absalom, that it was his time to unite the people, to bring them together, to be the one leading the charge. It was more political. It was also the safer alternative. For Hushai was correct that David did have a lot of experience in war, so it was safer to make sure, let's gather a bigger force, a larger force, not a small strike force, but let's gather everybody. That phrase, from Dan to Beersheba, indicates all of Israel. Let's gather everybody that we can, and we will make sure we know exactly where he's at. We'll go and surround that town, and we'll raise it to the ground to make sure that we get him. Also happens to be the more grandiose plan. The one that would appeal to Absalom's vanity. Of you'll be the one leading the charge. You'll be the one raising David to the ground. You'll be the one having defeated him. It was a plan that would appeal to the safety, diplomacy, and the arrogance of Absalom. Yes, sir?
It says, for the Lord had ordained to thwart the good counsel of you said it for me. Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring calamity on Absalom.
Yes, that God, through his providence, working through Hushai, had ordained that the counsel of Ahithophel would be defeated. How dire was David's situation in this moment? On a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being, it's a walk in the park, and 10 being it's the worst it could be, where do you think you'd rate it?
Based on what I read, I say his chances are pretty good for him. However, from his perspective, he might not feel the same way.
You're correct that we have some insight because of the text that God has ordained to defeat Ahithophel, that we have some sense that God is working. But in terms of from the perspective of David, of where his chances lie, he seems to be in real trouble. That not only does he no longer have the throne, not only the people seem to be against him, but the wisest counselor, remember that Ahithophel's counsel was understood to be by the Israelites as if it was from God himself, because it was so wise. That all these things are stacked up against David, and yet God has ordained to defeat Ahithophel's counsel through Hushai. That even when things seem darkest and most dire, that we needn't give up because our God is able to prevail even in the most challenging of circumstances. Yes, ma'am. David does seem to have great hesitancy of going up against Absalom, as we will see. And one wonders what would have happened if Absalom had come against him in that way. But ultimately, David's going to say what needs to be done should be done. Now let's continue on looking at verses 15 through 22, if I can get somebody to read that for me, please.
Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now, send a message immediately and tell David, do not spend the night in the fords in the desert. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En Rogel. A servant girl was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left quickly and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, "Where are Ahinaz and Jonathan?" The women answered them, "They crossed over the brook." The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After the men had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, "Set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you." So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan.
Thank you. So what happens in this text?
Finds a way to get word to David.
Hushai finds a
on
way
how to react.
through a series of individuals to make sure that word gets to David. There's a town in Rogel that is briefly mentioned, and Rogel was the site of a spring. And that spring would have been a place where people gathered water. It's outside of the city of Jerusalem, a place where people would normally gather, where you'd see people coming and going all the time. So it was a good place to try and set up a meeting for the two spies, or the two messengers, are not to go into the city, but rather are to remain outside the city so as to hopefully avoid them getting caught or seen, and make sure that things are done in a very secretive kind of way. So they meet there at the spring, and somehow on the way, the servant girl who comes and relays the message, somebody sees that encounter and relays word to Absalom that word of what is taking place has gotten out of the city, and now David is going to know. And so Absalom sends his men to go find these two messengers. And what happens?
Hide in a well.
They hide in a well. Now, some kind of covering was put over the top of it. Apparently, it wasn't unusual to put a covering over a well, and it managed to be hidden fairly well. The well seems to be hidden quite well, so that it's passed over and not seen, and those two messengers are able to get out, and off they go. Now, how did the covering get on the well?
The woman.
The woman, presumably of the house, who is never named, by the way, she puts the cover over the well. And some grain to make sure that's hidden, to make sure that it doesn't... my suspicion, I wonder if it was just sprinkled on so as to seem like it'd been there for a while, or either way, somehow or another it hides that someone could be hiding in
So
there.
she was a friendly to the...
It's a friendly.
Yeah.
Notice the town where this well is at.
Yeah.
What else happened at Bahiram? It's in chapter 16. Chapter 16, specifically in verse 5 and following. It's where he meets Shimei or Shammai, who curses him because Bahiram is this tends to lean towards Saul kind of place. That even amongst this kind of location, that David still had friends. I can't help but see some level of similarity between this and what happens with Rahab and the spies. If you recall, the spies come to Jericho to spy out the land as the Israelites are marching in, and they too are discovered and are fleeing because of the guards that have spotted them, and they manage to make their way to Rahab's house, and Rahab grants them safety and hides them up on the roof and eventually lowers them out through the window with a cord. The Israelites should not have expected to find help in Jericho. The messengers probably shouldn't have expected to find help in Bahurim. Now, it seems like there was an individual who probably supported David, but in terms of the location that was there, that both were seemingly inhospitable places, that both were hidden by somewhat unlikely saviors, that God can provide escape, provide help from the most unlikely of places and the most inhospitable of environments. And that is the case for David. That God's providence, which we have seen throughout all of Samuel, for God has provided for David when he was fleeing from Saul. God has, over and over again, the text indicates that Saul almost had him and David manages to escape. That God provides the food and the sustenance that David and his men needed to survive out in the wilderness. That over and over again, God provided for and protected David through his providence. And even here, he protects David through his providence, protecting the message, because those messengers have to get to David for David to escape. And God provides a place of escape for them so that David is able to escape. That God continually provides for David. Let's finish out the chapter, verses 23 through 29.
When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own town. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and and Machir, the son of Ammiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai, and the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him, David with him to eat. And they said, "The people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness."
Thank you. Good job. Good job with those names. There are a lot of them. When you come across names and you have no idea how to pronounce them, just do your best. Say it with gusto. Nobody will know the difference. What happens in this text? There are kind of two events that take place. One, Ahithophel commits suicide by hanging. Kind of wonder exactly why, but Ahithophel was in a no-win situation at this point, for his counsel had not been taken by Absalom, which indicates he probably wouldn't have been perceived as a great counselor. And at this point, because his counsel wasn't taken, if David wins, well, he probably gets put to death. If Hushai wins, then Hushai's counsel is proven to be better than Ahithophel's counsel. He's in kind of a no-win situation here, goes home and kind of takes a coward's way out. What else happens?
Absalom gave Amasa the army over Joab instead of Joab.
Okay,
ruling it.
Absalom promotes Amasa over Joab. I guess wanting to clean house. What else takes place? I guess there were three things instead of two.
David gets a jump on.
That David manages to escape. He gets to safety and gets to a place where his men are provided for. And that because of Hushai and because of God's providence working through Hushai to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel and protect the messengers, that David gets the message and is able to escape seemingly quite quickly. I don't know how much time Hushai was able to buy David. So David moves very, very quickly, and off he goes and manages to get to a place of safety where he can, where he's provided for. Yeah, all kinds of relatives. All kinds of relatives going on here, and this person related to that person, and this person is that person, that he is taken care of by those who are close to him. Do you recall why Ahithophel, or at least why we think Ahithophel betrays David? We indicated that there might be a reason based upon genealogies of who he was related to. That it appears from the genealogies that he might have been the grandfather of Bathsheba. If that's the case, then Ahithophel seems to be striving to get vengeance, to enact vengeance upon David for that which he had done. What was the result of Ahithophel's pursuit of taking vengeance into his own hands? There's the obvious result at the moment, but what were the results? Okay, God certainly doesn't bless it and works actively against it. What else? Cost him his life. What else? What about the people? David's people are, yes, but not because of Ahithophel. Ahithophel's with Absalom at the moment. David's people do, yes, but in terms of all of Israel, in terms of what takes place within Israel, that not simply because of Ahithophel, but ultimately because of both Absalom and Ahithophel's pursuit of vengeance, that at the moment it has divided the kingdom, caused this rift, not simply between father and son, but between all of the people who are now in an uproar, trying to decide who they're going to follow, afraid for their lives, afraid of what might happen, because, at least in part, because these two individuals decided to take vengeance into their own hands. We're told in Deuteronomy, vengeance is mine and recompense, for the time when their foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand. There we go. Oh, cool. Excellent. And then we're told, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. That inevitably, when we sow sin, when we pursue sin, that inevitably it comes back to haunt us. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Inevitably, whenever we set forth on a path contrary to what God would have us to do, inevitably it leads to consequences that are often and almost always, at some point, dire. And in this case, because Ahithophel and Absalom sought to take vengeance into their own hands rather than leaving it in the hands of God, not only will it ultimately cost both of them their lives, but it causes chaos in the kingdom, because they chose to take into their own hands what belonged rightfully to God. As we look over this chapter and in the chapter before, we notice that there are several individuals who come to David's aid. Actually, we encounter several individuals that David encounters, all who fit into different categories. There's Hushai and Ittai, who we could say are David's allies, his friends, those who are there taking care of him. This unnamed woman who covers who covers the hiding place of the spies, the servant woman who takes the word to those spies, all who are in support of David and his allies. We encounter those who were his foes, those who betrayed David, such as Ahithophel or Shimei, who takes the opportunity to curse David for what has taken place. We encounter Ziba, who seems to only be engaged to try and take advantage of David's predicament, to try and benefit from the chaos that has emerged. And he pretends to be on David's side, but really, as we find out later, he's kind of just on his own side. How do you think David reacted? For spoiler alert, David is going to reclaim the throne. He is going to make it back. He is going to be able to sit on that throne again. When he finally does, how do you think that he reacted to the various groups that he encountered during his flight? How do you think he reacted to those who had been his supporters? Those who had risked much. For if David had failed, they risked losing everything. How do you think David treated them when he came back? How do you think he treated his friend Hushai, who was right there in the lion's den facing the enemy himself? Maybe showing him favor. It's certain that he remembered them. That he remembered them and what had been done for him, and it's likely that he showed favor towards them. That's his enemy, though. You're correct, that those who were against him, that David, at minimum, at least kept them at arm's length, but likely there was punishment to go around. But there was still vengeance. Leads me to this point. One thing that is clear throughout the Bible, especially within Revelation, is that we are in the midst of a spiritual war. And like with any war, there are sides. However, there is no neutrality within this particular war. There's either ally or enemy. We're told that Satan is the god of this world. It doesn't indicate the level of power he has, rather the influence within this particular locale. At times, it can feel a little bit like David must have felt, and David's supporters must have felt, that it seemed like everything was dire and everything was against David, and it really wasn't sure what was going to happen. And was it really worth the risk of everything that was going to take place? Was it really worth risking life and limb and wealth and everything they had to risk? Sometimes we can feel the same way. That it can feel like everything's against us, that maybe, just maybe, the situation is truly dire, but spoiler alert, it turns out that God already wins and that he not only reigns on the throne now, but will continue to reign upon the throne. When that magnificent day comes and Christ rides down on the clouds to call all of us home who have followed him, how do you think he will treat those who have been his supporters, who have been those who have risked life and limb and wealth and risked everything so that they might be able to follow him and do his will and be his supporters in the midst of this war? All of us must choose some side within this conflict. And within this room, I believe that we have all chosen to be upon the side of God, and we must continually remember that he will not forget that which we have done for him, that which we have chosen to do for him in the midst of this conflict. And he will reward us on the day of his return, when he sits on that throne forever. Yes, ma'am. Compassion, love, favor, reward. We must remember that which we will receive to make it through those challenging moments when it feels like everything is dying. Let's pray together and we'll be done. Dear Heavenly Father, we are so thankful that we already know how things end. So thankful that we know that you will return. So thankful that we know that there is reward for us in heaven. Lord, we ask you help us to look forward to that in the moments when things are tough and seem dire. We ask you help us to glorify you in all we do. We love you and commit to be with you in Christ's name.